Thanks.
Now, Stacy, you're 6 feet away,
Okay.
so you're welcome to take off your mask.
Oh, wow.
That'll be easier for everybody.
That's going to make it a lot easier. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this training. We do it every year. I change it up a little bit. I've added some stuff on disinfection. It's stuff that you've heard before, but I think it's definitely worth going over. So the things that we're going to look at today or talk about today are fire safety, electrical safety, a little bit about how our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system works. We'll talk about disinfection processes, pests, properly anchoring things so they don't tip over. And then we'll also talk a little bit about preventable workplace injuries, simple things like tripping, falling, things like that. And as Mrs. Wright mentioned, if you have a question at any point or idea or anything, raise your hand and please share. Okay, so the first topic is fire safety. In each one of your rooms and basically every space in the facility, you have an evacuation map. And I know that you guys are familiar with that. That's something that you need to routinely look at and make sure that you have a very good understanding of. We have a whole training system around that, so I'm not going to go into great detail there. Proper response to a fire evacuation. And so I'm going to share a little bit of what I've learned over the years because I've worked in some industrial environments where fires were common and some things that I learned from that. And I think the first thing in any situation like that is to take a breath and say a quick prayer, and allow yourself to kind of relax a little bit. And then you can go into a mode of, what's going on around me? What are my eyes telling me is going on? And then think about the training that you've been given and how is that training that you're given going to help you in those surroundings, and then act accordingly. So the other thing that's worth discussing when it comes to response to a fire is when should you or I try to put out a fire? And so it's a great question. First and foremost, our priority is the students in here and then you. And so that is your priority. The building can be repaired, can be rebuilt, not an issue. So that should help you answer that question. But if you could be in a situation where I have to put out a fire because it might affect my ability to get my kids out. And so first of all, know where your fire extinguishers are located and know where they're at, and then also be able to use them. And I'll talk a little bit about fire extinguishers in a bit. So in general, the priority is to get your students and yourself out. Let the fire department take care of the building. Okay, so our fire protection equipment that we have on campus consists of fire extinguishers, which we have located kind of at each corner of the building. We have a fire sprinkler system, and you can see these silver things in the ceiling are essentially water sprinklers. And so this is kind of a close-up view of what they look like. It's much the same that you would have, watering your lawn. And the way it works is there's a little glass vial in here that senses temperature. And so when it gets hot enough, it'll spray. And so it's based upon heat. So hot air rises. So these will go off at about anywhere from 150 to 180 degrees. Again, that's why it's not critical that you try to fight a fire. Get everybody out. This will take care of a really serious fire. So the other thing to consider, kind of from a practical standpoint, is this little vial in here is glass, and if it breaks, water will spray. And so I don't think we've ever had that happen on campus where somebody inadvertently broke this. I've been in other places where it has, and it makes a mess. And so one of the most common things that'll happen is these will be within reach, and somebody will put a coat hanger, and they'll hang a coat or something in there, or tie something on there and break it, just simply because they didn't know that this was glass. So I think that's worth mentioning. So another component that we have in the system are smoke detectors. And so in this room, you'll see them kind of right next to the loudspeakers. They're kind of a faded white or yellowish. They will respond to very small amounts of smoke, and what that triggers is a call to the fire department. And so that pretty much happens automatically. It's not connected to these at all. So this is strictly temperature. So that's another kind of safety net that we have. They're going to detect small amounts of smoke. They're located throughout all the buildings, all the rooms, and then are also in the ductwork, air duct work of the air conditioning system to pick that up as well. Another component that we have are the pull, so these are called fire pull stations. And so they're there for you to use if you think there's a fire. And so it's very possible that there may be a fire that these smoke detectors, sprinklers, and everything don't detect. This is your tool to call the fire department. So as soon as you activate this guy, it automatically calls the fire department, and the fire department's very close, and they'll be here within usually 5 minutes. So, can't reset it. So these are located in every room. And again, like your fire extinguishers, this is something to be familiar, where they're at. And so one thing I will say is, it says push here and then pull down. You do have to push this kind of hard. So don't be afraid of it. If you ever have to use it, just hit it, and pull it down, and then it stays. You don't need to do anything else. And then follow through with notifying and evacuating. Okay. We also have fire horns and sirens that make a lot of noise. And so those are located in all the classrooms. I know lately we've done some tests where they've accidentally gone off. I apologize for that. But they are very loud, and the intent is that everybody in the building will hear them. And then we also have, I can't see one visibly, in the hallway here, there's one that includes a flashing light. And so, that's for anybody that may be hearing impaired, that they can see that flashing and be able to respond to that. And then finally, we have emergency exits. This building is very well designed that way. Every room, you have an emergency exit, and then we have exits out each door. We have exit signs that kind of tell you where to go. So one of the things to talk about is blocking of any of these devices where they can't be seen or reached. So overall, you guys do a good job of making sure that we can get to these, that we're accessible on the strobe lights, the flashing lights. So just be aware of that. Anytime you're moving stuff around, hey, I don't want to block this. And I think what we've talked about in this facility is as long as you're not covering it, it's acceptable. So I could, if we had a wall here, I could position this cart right here, and that would be acceptable. Now we couldn't, push a file cabinet up against it and block it, obviously. So we have a little bit of flexibility when it comes to blocking that. So any questions about fire safety? All right, super. Okay, so we'll talk about fire hazards. And I'll talk about just some of the most common fire hazards. Some of this applies to this facility, but some of it may not, but it may apply to something that you're in your home or whatever. So one of the most common fire hazards are electrical issues. And that includes cords, outlets, lights, stuff like that. Extension cords are one of the biggest sources of fires. And so we'll talk a little bit about extension cords. I brought one from my office that I use occasionally. You can plug it in and then plug multiple things in here. And so some of the limitations of this cord are, it's not smart. You're going to plug things in here. It doesn't know if it's flowing too much current and getting hot. And so these have to be used with caution. So the ideal way to use any kind of extension cord, if you're plugging in multiple items, is on the end of the extension cord, put a power strip. So the power strip has its own circuit protection to prevent the cord from overheating. So that's ideal. Another rule of thumb that I use about extension cords is to make sure that you're not overloading an extension cord. Let's say this was the cord to my new blender that I have at home. We actually have one, so this comes to mind. And so I'm going to plug this blender into an extension cord. Let's say I plug it into this one. So whatever you're plugging into, the cord should be at least as thick as what you're plugging into, kind of a rule of thumb. And so in this case, it wouldn't be a real good idea to plug my new blender, high-speed blender, into this cord that's a lot thinner. So just kind of a rule of thumb. The other thing you can do if you're not sure is just feel of the cord. If the cord feels anything warm at all, don't use it. Find another cord, figure out another way to plug it in. Okay, portable heaters are another source of fires. We don't use a lot of those here. They are acceptable to use. They have a lot of built-in safety devices that prevent them from causing fires. But again, something to be cautious about. Candles are also a potential source of fire. Obviously cooking. And then also washers and dryers, and in particular dryers. So one of the sources of fires are the lint vents clogging up. And so what happens when you clog up your vent that goes outside is it can't get rid of that heat. And so your dryer can overheat. So here we clean the vents out twice a year to make sure that they're clean. In your homes, you should be doing that. If you, probably once a year, once every 2 years, should have that done by somebody to make sure that that's clear. Okay, Christmas trees. I think now with LED lights, that's much less of a risk. But with some of the older lights, the big bulbs, in a dry tree, that's an issue. And then the final one on my list is lightning. So we're fairly susceptible to lightning here. We actually have had lightning strikes to buildings. We had one to G building last summer. And so just have an awareness about that. If we have an electrical storm and you maybe smell something that smells like something's burning, it could be something that was damaged by the lightning. And then finally, use your senses, your sense of smell, your sense of touch to kind of give you a pre-warning. I know we had some cords or something that we were concerned about, I don't know, and it was because somebody smelled it, and that's a great way to kind of prevent a fire or even having to evacuate. So I applaud you guys for really being aware of that. Okay. Yes?
On this one that you have, like with the extension cords, that square one,
Mm-hmm.
are those safe?
Okay, so the question is, are these safe? And the answer is no. And so where it would be safe is, like, say I had some phones to plug in here that have little tiny cords, they would be safe. But just like this cord, it can't tell if it has too much current. And so it would be much better to use a power strip than it would be to use one of these.
But for like the kids' iPads,
Yeah.
not,
I think with iPads, I think you're safe. I know you're safe because it's a very small current. Ideally, this is better. But that's a good question. I know I have at least one of these in my home. Okay, good question. So electrical safety. So we'll just kind of slide right into that. Keep plugs covered, which is part of your culture down here. You keep all your plugs covered, which is great. Be aware that water and electricity don't mix. We talked about extension cords already and power strips. So with respect to water and electricity, we do have in our sink locations what are called ground fault interrupt plugs. Basically what that means is those plugs, those outlets can sense a short to ground, usually by water. That's why we put them around water, and they'll open up and prevent the electricity from flowing. They work very, very quickly so that you don't get electrocuted. So they mostly just do their job. I know sometimes we have issues with them not resetting. Any kind of problem that you have with a GFI plug, that would be a maintenance request, something that we'd want to get taken care of very quickly. Okay. Emergency lighting is it's in all of our rooms. And so you don't see it, but basically all the light fixtures or strategic light fixtures have a battery pack in them. And so when the power goes out, that battery pack will keep at least one light lit in your room for 20 to 30 minutes. So not an issue here during the day, but in other parts of the building, that's an issue where we're in there at night. That is tested yearly to make sure that it works properly. And finally, circuit breakers. So just like in your home, everything has a breaker that prevents the circuit from overheating. The breakers are located in a utility closet off the kitchen, and that's something that me and my team maintain. And so anytime a circuit breaker trips, what we do is we first make sure we understand why it tripped. You know, was it just something we tried to plug too many things in there, or is there a problem with the circuit? And so it's tempting just to reset it and go on, but there's a little bit of investigation that needs to go on there to make sure that we don't just reset it and maybe we have a bad wire and it trips again. Okay, any questions on electrical? Right, super. All right, next topic is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or we sometimes call it HVAC. So building is equipped to bring in outside air all the time. I think we had some training yesterday and that question came up. And one of the things I did is I did some calculations on how much air we bring in. Basically, in 30 minutes, we will completely replace the air in all the spaces with outside air. So that's how quickly it turns over. It's once every 30 minutes about the room air is replaced with outside air. So that outside air that comes in, it's filtered to make sure we're not bringing in a bunch of dust and allergens, and then it's also cooled and dehumidified. I think as far as air conditioning and heating is concerned, your rooms are typically set for like 72 cooling and 68 heating, and you do have some ability to adjust that for your comfort. We continue to make improvements to our cooling system. We've made some more improvements over the last 4 or 5 months, and I think your facility here benefits the most from it because you're, to a certain extent, at the end of the line. So for cooling, we pump cold water around the campus, and that cold water is used to cool all the rooms. So you're at the end of that line, and so any issue that we have along the way tends to affect you guys more. So we've been working on that to improve the comfort level and also improve the humidity control, because if the humidity is low, we're comfortable. We can actually have a higher temperature and still feel comfortable at a lower humidity. So we've kind of been working on that really over the last 6 months or so. All right, so each room is equipped with a thermostat and a slider that gives you, I think it's plus or minus 1 degree, and those tend to be real helpful, like in the winter months where you kind of go from hot to cold. You can slide that over, and because the room, you'll either be too cold or too hot when you get a quick change in weather. Okay, so questions about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning? Okay. Yes.
If there was a COVID-19 outbreak in a classroom, what would be the likelihood of that air circulating through the air conditioning and transferring to a nearby classroom?
So the question is, are we exchanging air between classrooms? And if we have a COVID-19 outbreak, is that a problem? So in this building, we do not exchange air. Each room has its own recirculation unit. Now, obviously, in these outer rooms like this, we have units on each end that circulate that, but they're completely separate. So that's a great question. We're blessed that way. So when these facilities were designed back in the late 90s, in the engineering world, we call that robust engineering was put into it. Okay. Next module, we'll review some of our disinfection principles, and I know we've talked a lot about this, but it's worth going over again, and then also for anybody that's watching this for the first time, this may be the first time that you hear some of this stuff. So first, we'll talk about the terms for cleaning. And so I know there's a lot of terms out there now. You hear disinfecting, sanitizing, what does all that mean? And so I think it's important to kind of have a general understanding of that. So you basically have 4 four things. First is just cleaning, and that involves soap and water or just water, and you're just kind of getting rid of the dirt and the visible stuff. The second is to sanitize, and that's kind of like the lowest level of killing germs. And so this really kills the least amount of pathogens. You have like a very, very low concentration disinfectant. And so it doesn't kill all the pathogens. So the term disinfect refers to killing 99% of the pathogens. So it's a higher level of cleaning. Stronger chemicals are used to do that. And then the final process is to sterilize. And that usually involves boiling something, heating something up, that sort of thing. I mean, you do that with a lot of stuff for the babies. In the medical world, you have autoclaves for sterilizing instruments. It's typically not something that we do here. So sometimes you'll hear the term sanitizing and disinfect used interchangeably, and that's okay. It's just disinfect is just at a higher level. What we do in this facility is we disinfect. Our goal is 99+% killing of the pathogens. Okay, so to disinfect, the surface first has to be free of any kind of visible dirt or buildup. So not an issue in your facility. Everything here is very, very clean. But if I was going to disinfect, say, my picnic table in my backyard, it's not really that clean. I'd really want to just wipe it off first with some soap and water to get the dirt off of it, because that allows the disinfectant to focus on killing the germs instead of just getting rid of dirt. So that's the first step. A lot of disinfectants, particularly our NDC disinfectant and our Hilliard number 19, they're formulated with a detergent and a disinfectant. So they essentially clean and disinfect in the whole process. So we have some other higher grade disinfectants. There's some, I just refer to them as hospital grade disinfectants, that are specially formulated to kill a very wide range of pathogens very, very quickly. And they're typically used when we have like a known bodily fluid spill, or we've had somebody in a space that we suspect is COVID-19 positive. So a lot of times I've gotten the question, well, why don't we use these hospital grade disinfectants just everywhere? And the answer is, it increases the chemical exposure. And so it's just a higher concentration chemical. When we don't need it, we really shouldn't use it, and just reduce the risk of chemical exposure to everybody. Okay, so one of the key things in using a disinfectant properly is making sure that it's on the surface long enough to kill the pathogens. It has to be there long enough to break through the cell wall and kill. So that is, from what I've seen, from what I've read, that's the number one way, or it's the number one way of misusing a disinfectant, is just spray it on, wipe it off real quick. So for our NDC and our Hilliard number 19, it's 10 minutes. So like we've discussed before, sometimes 10 minutes isn't possible, and you do as long as you can, basically. So that's most important. Then finally, all disinfectants have some sort of shelf life. They eventually start losing their effectiveness. Bleach decays very, very quickly. So I don't think we're using bleach anymore. But if you're using bleach at home, just be aware that even sitting in the jug, it has a shelf life, and be sure that you're aware of that shelf life. And then once you mix it, you have 1 day to use it. After that day, you should mix more. So it's a great disinfectant. It has a shelf life. So our NDC and our Hilliard product, the shelf life is 30 days, which is great because typically you can go through a whole bottle within 30 days, no issue. Okay, so that's kind of the high points on disinfection. I know in some of our other training we've gotten into a lot of details. Any questions about disinfection processes? All right, super. Okay, we're moving along great. Okay, pests, and by that I mean not people. all those other little varmints that we have around our campus. And so that ranges from, ants, roaches, spiders, scorpions. I mean, we have it all, right? And that's a risk to our kids here. So first of all, be on the lookout for them and report them quickly. We have a pest control agency that we're contracted with, and they come out and they have a periodic treatment of all the buildings inside and outside. But anytime we spot, insects, it's part of their contract to come out and touch up after hours. So don't be shy about reporting stuff. That's really the key to maintaining that. Yes.
I had a dead scorpion in my room.
Okay.
For myself.
Okay.
So I have like these little holes where where the door meets the floor, and I'm thinking that's where it
Ah.
came from.
Yeah.
Thankfully it was dead,
Mm-hmm.
but if it wasn't, that's
Okay. Okay, so her situation is she has a dead scorpion in her room, and it looks like it may have come in through some holes. So what's your room number?
118 right
118. Okay. So that's a great job of investigating, okay? Because that helps us. We'll not only be able to treat for that scorpion, we can seal up that hole. So anything that you can kind of look around and say, oh, well, yeah, we had, some food here or whatever, that's going to help us. The other thing we've done outside, because we back up to this green belt, we have other animals. We've had foxes, possums, raccoons, squirrels, all kinds of stuff. So we've strategically placed some sonic devices kind of around the perimeter of the back of our campus that will repel those creatures and just keep them. It doesn't hurt them, but it emits a sound that they can hear, and it strobes a light that keeps them away. And so we want to keep them off our campus. We really want to keep them off, particularly off the playgrounds, like at night. We've had some issues with that. So, but again, if you do see any animal or like that, that's something we want to report. So some quick things about, what can we do to prevent pests? And really it's basically deny them food and deny them water. And so they'll typically, what the pest control guys tell me is they can typically get food outside, they can't get water. And so things like water leaks, any kind of open water are things that attract them. And so try to minimize that. If you see like a leaking faucet or something, turn in a maintenance request, because that's not only wasting water, but it's also potentially drawing pests. All right. Right, just a quick note on making sure that all of our bookcases and storage cabinets and things like that are stable and that they won't fall on kids. And so basically all of our tall stuff has to be anchored to the wall. You guys are really good about giving us a maintenance request. Hey, we want to move this to here, and we'll re-anchor it. So just continue to do that. You have a great awareness of that things can fall over. And then finally, to prevent injuries from everybody, avoid stacking stuff up high. And kind of the rule of thumb that I use is if you're stacking stuff higher than what you can see, there's a risk of something falling off of there and either injuring you or somebody else. Okay. Okay, so some other common questions that I get asked, and we covered these last year, was about natural gas leaks. And so while we don't have any natural gas in this building, it's a good topic to go over if you have it in your home. And so natural gas is by nature not odor, it's odor free. So they add a chemical to it to make it smell. And so that chemical allows you to smell it at like very, very small concentrations. So that's your warning sign. If you smell it, it means there's a leak. I worked quite a bit with natural gas, and we had a rule of thumb, and that was if you can smell it, it's a very low concentration. You need to respond, you need to take proper action, but you were nowhere near an explosion. When you can no longer smell it, your nose can no longer process that smell, that was when you were in the likelihood of an explosion. So trying to give you a feel for, if you smell it, you don't need to just run. You need to, like I mentioned before, take a breath, not a real big one, take a breath and, hey, what do I need to do here? Natural gas rises, so be aware of that. If some of you have propane in your house, be aware that the propane is opposite, it lays. Propane can be very dangerous that way because the vapors will lay along the floor and you won't smell it. You won't smell it until it gets up to your nose. So if you do have a natural gas leak, you smell it, evacuate. Don't turn off or on any light switches, anything that would cause a source of combustion. Exit whatever building that you're in and call about that. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide comes from burning things, combustion, and so stoves, heaters, furnaces all generate carbon monoxide. The only thing, actually we have nothing in this building that would generate carbon monoxide. We do have a detector though, just to be sure. So carbon monoxide is also something that will lay and comes up, and so that's why I think ours are mounted down low, so it'll detect it. So the rules for responding to that would be the same. If your carbon monoxide detector goes off, just get everybody out to fresh air and then call 911. And then last topic in terms of gases, improperly mixed chemicals. And so the number one risk there is mixing cleaners and disinfectants. And so that's where you need to be very, very careful. Anything you do, the rule is just never mix any cleaners or any disinfectants. We're blessed to live in a world where whatever kind of product you have, it's already formulated for you. Back 30 years ago, it was common. I remember my mom would mix stuff, to clean the house. And so there's really no need to do that. And so that's the way to avoid that. And so some very dangerous gases can be generated by that. Chlorine gas and some other gases that are very deadly. Okay. So my final module is preventable workplace injuries. So I'd listed out 5 here that are pretty common, and the first one is overexertion, and that's basically doing something, either lifting something improperly or just fatigue over time. So basically get help whenever you're moving anything. And so kind of a common workplace guideline for lifting is that 50 pounds, if you're healthy, you can very safely lift that. Anything over 50 pounds, get help, get assistance. Now, I could lift 50 pounds in a way where I'm stretching where I could hurt my back. That's where you have to also be very careful. So just proper lifting, use your legs when you're lifting and get help whenever you can. In the industrial world, that was always our number one injury claim was lifting accidents. And almost 100% of them was because somebody had very good intentions of doing something. The second one is slipping or tripping. It can be caused by just areas where we have carpets that aren't properly bound. Anytime you see an issue with our entry mats, let me know. Our contractor's been really good so far about providing us with mats that are not curled up. But just be aware of that. I've never really seen anything in your facility that would be a tripping hazard other than our carpets. You guys do a good job of keeping things picked up and neat, and that's really the key to preventing those. The third one is falling from heights, and so that could be a ladder or step stool. On campus, staff is not allowed to use a ladder without assistance, and so that's just to make sure there's some accountability there. But the other area that's not as well controlled is like a small step stool, and you can fall off of one of those and hurt yourself just like you can a ladder. So with your step stool, make sure that the stool is in good condition, that's not broken. And I say that because I personally fell off of one that was broken. Make sure it's in good condition and make sure that it's stable, and go slowly. All right, and then the last one is walking. It's called walking into injuries, and this has actually been on the rise in the last couple of years, just because people are very focused on their cell phones and will tend to run into things. It's also an issue around like blind corners and stuff. Just be aware of that. My funny story about walking into a facility where I used to work, we had an inner campus where we had a lot of foot traffic. We would occasionally have to drive in there to pick something up, and I'm driving very slowly, and one of my fellow employees is on his phone, and I stopped. I came to a complete stop in my vehicle, and he actually ran into me. And so, it scared him. It didn't hurt him, but I mean, it's an example of how we can sometimes really get distracted by our cell phones. Okay, well, that's all of my prepared presentation. I can answer any kind of other question that I maybe covered or things that I didn't cover. Yes.
Stacy, one of the topics in minimum standards talks about safety in the street, and right now we're having children offloading vehicles and often running back to their parents. Can you just talk to us about some strategies to keep children safe as they're offloading or returning them to their parents at the end of the day?
Ooh, the question is, how do we keep our kids safe in the parking lot? And so this will be an interactive discussion here, because I don't have a direct answer for that. And so I guess the challenge is, I know with my kids when they were little, they would sometimes just dart. And so what kind of ideas, suggestions do you guys have for that?
I think we should have cones where the cars should park, and then have cones where children might wave you and teach them to stand up until mom and dad is out of the car. So park the cone is park with the child. And that way, when the cones are free, you could be like, okay, I'm not taking any more children, and I'm not taking any more until these 4 cones are done, and the next group comes in.
Okay, so the answer was, we can set up some cones strategically to kind of act as almost like markers.
This is where the car parks, this is where the child stands.
Right.
So one for the car, one for the child to stand, and that needs to be facing
Okay.
the children. These spots here.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I know we're not really trying to hold their hands, but could we put gloves on and then hold the child's hand as we walk them out to assist them and direct them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that's really the best answer, is hold on to them and don't let them go until their parents come
Yeah.
hold on to them. And then change your gloves,
Yeah.
wash your hands,
Okay. So great answer, and that is basically wear gloves and hold on to them, and then when you're done, change your gloves. So good. Okay. Other questions?
Awesome, great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you for your attention.